After all the development troubles Sonic 3 had that resulted in the game being split into two halves, we would finally receive Part 2 8 months later, in the form of Sonic & Knuckles. And Sonic & Knuckles was a confusing product for most people at the time. Upon opening the box, adorned with what is the greatest box art logo design in gaming history, don't at me, they were greeted with a monstrosity of a cartridge that featured its own additional cartridge slot on top of it. The game box boasted that it featured lock-on technology, where plugging Sonic 1, 2, or 3 into this new cartridge would unlock bonus content. While this was advertised as some revolutionary new piece of hardware, it was actually just SEGA making up for splitting Sonic 3 in half. This lock-on tech was how players could experience the full version of Sonic 3, the way it was apparently always intended to be. Sonic Team even had plans to release the complete Sonic 3 in Japan as a limited edition high-capacity cartridge, but this idea was quickly dropped when they realized that many people were just importing the American version anyway. So as it stood, the only way to experience the game in full was to own both carts. When played as a singular cart, Sonic & Knuckles picks up right where Sonic 3 left off. Tails has been replaced with a playable version of Knuckles, in a story that takes place after Sonic's has finished. And there's no save feature this time, with your character selection being done on the title screen itself. Being the second half of an existing game means graphics and assets are all carried over, as well as the game design. Level progression is the same, as are power-ups and special stages. One notable change is that Sonic 3's bonus stage has been swapped out for 2 possible bonus stages here, and which one you get depends on your ring count whenever you pass a checkpoint. The first combines the rotating special stages from Sonic 1 with the Casino Night slot machines from Sonic 2, which rewards or subtracts rings depending on what pictures you spin. The second is a vertical stage the player must traverse in ball form by using proper momentum and timing to launch themselves from these magnetic balls, collecting rings and power-ups on the way that grant bigger and bigger rewards the closer the player gets to the top. But the biggest addition to Sonic & Knuckles is right there in the title. Knuckles is playable this time, with his own unique moveset that is pretty vastly different from both Sonic and Tails. Knuckles has a spin dash like the others, but has a lower top running speed than Sonic and can't jump as high. But in return, his double jump is an infinite glide move that carries him through the air until he hits the ground or a wall, and gliding into walls allows him to dig his knuckles in and climb up or down. Knuckles' moveset is a bit more mechanical, with his glide bringing him to a complete stop upon landing, and so while he isn't as mobile in the air as Tails or as quick and agile as Sonic, Knuckles is easily the character best built for exploring. Combine that with his lower jump, and the fact that he can break through certain barricades that Sonic and Tails can't, Knuckles often has his own completely unique paths through each zone. Knuckles even gains a super form just like Sonic does, upon collecting all the Chaos Emeralds. The zones in Sonic & Knuckles, I feel, have a slight edge over those in Sonic 3. The previous game had a few greats, like Hydro City and Ice Cap, sure, but Sonic & Knuckles is almost nothing but winners, aside from one very large and sandy speed bump halfway through. Mushroom Hill is a playground of an opening level, with almost everything you see being an actual interactive element, and Flying Battery is a thrilling dash through one of Eggman's battleships with absolutely killer music. The zones from Lava Reef onward all form into a sort of grand climax of this multi-game Death Egg arc that started all the way back in Sonic 2. Lava Reef's Act 2 is a really cool visual twist where all the magma cools over to form a completely new look for the second half, complete with a drastic change in music while still being an arrangement of Act 1's music. This follows with a reinvented version of Hidden Palace, a level that was scrapped from Sonic 2, which is where Sonic and Knuckles finally face off one-on-one. And it's here that the game's more ambitious storytelling starts to really show itself off, as not only does the backdrop of the fight provide foreshadowing to the game's upcoming finale, it's also where we finally get answers to the questions posed by Sonic 3. The source of the Emerald reading that brought Sonic and Tails here, Eggman's plan, and why Knuckles was trying to stop us. Simply put, Eggman took advantage of Knuckles' isolation and gullible nature to play him for a fool. Hidden Palace leads to Sky Sanctuary, and this is an amazing set piece. As the Death Egg rises into the sky and deploys several deadly robots to rain terror on Angel Island, Knuckles, injured and exhausted from Eggman's backstabbing, uses the last of his strength to extend a bridge for Sonic to move on. But really look here. Sonic could have made that jump easy. But that wasn't the point. Knuckles is showing a gesture of goodwill, giving Sonic his blessing and asking him to save his island, his home. If you stick around here to check on Knuckles, there's even this animation where he tells Sonic to go on without him. I love that basically nobody knew about this before Cybershell brought it up in his video, and yet now we would all riot if it somehow was not here anymore. But even beyond the level's opening, the rest of the zone still manages to tell a story. It's essentially one giant playable cutscene, and I don't mean that in the derogatory sense. Sky Sanctuary has a lot of verticality as you try to catch up to the Death Egg, and you repeatedly run into the egg robos being deployed as you make your way through the zone, even seeing helpless animals being frightened out of their homes. A new robotic Sonic doppelganger also confronts you several times throughout the level, first showing up in repeats of boss fights from prior games, perhaps to taunt Sonic, before taking you on in a fair fight at the very end. And the game never takes control away from you during any of this. It's all communicated organically through environmental cues and stage hazards. And after that scorecard tally finishes, Sonic finally makes his way onto Eggman's massive starship itself for the final level. And the Death Egg is now more than just a pair of boss battles. A full-blown 2-act zone complete with a gravity-switching gimmick. But it's only if you have all the Chaos Emeralds that you unlock the true final boss. A showdown between Super Sonic and Eggman in space, as the crazed Doctor makes one last desperate attempt to escape with the Master Emerald after the Death Egg is destroyed. And even before all this, as you get closer to the end of the game, bosses begin to consist of multiple phases, and that just adds to the climactic nature of those final few acts even more. This is like actual storytelling in a 2D platformer, all without a single line of spoken dialogue. Platformers are not a genre known for plot usually, especially not back in 1994, and so Sonic & Knuckles truly was breaking new ground here. Sandopolis, though, is the one level in this game where my eyes just kinda glaze over. I'd say it's this game's Labyrinth zone, but Sandopolis doesn't even manage to have Labyrinth's sense of challenge. It's really just a boring level that goes on far too long as you deal with a bunch of slow-moving platforms, switches, time-sensitive doors, and rappel ropes, all with an Act 1 boss that you can't take out in any timely fashion. Act 2 is even worse, adding a group of unkillable ghosts that can only be scared away by keeping the lights on with these levers. It seems like every Sonic game ends up having that one level that nobody really likes, and in this one, Sandopolis is it. That being said, the level does hit me with a certain sort of 90s nostalgia in a way the other levels don't, but for the life of me, I have no idea why. I just always look at this level and go, yep, it's 1994 alright. A few of the other levels have some low points too, but nothing that really detracts from the overall experience. Death Egg's gravity gimmick is fine, but these stupid light ring segments are annoying. Some actually do carry you to higher ground so you can progress, but others just waste your time by flinging you in circles over completely flat ground. And while you can skip these with a well-timed jump, there's no immediate in-game indicator for which ones matter and which ones don't. The boss of Lava Reef Zone starts off exciting by including this mad dash of running and jumping over lava and bottomless pits, but then the actual boss fight is just a repetitive sequence of jumps as you wait for the boss to die. There's really no reason why this boss should take 14 goddamn hits to defeat, but for some godforsaken reason it does. Still, these are ultimately minor complaints in what is an otherwise excellent game. Knuckles' version of the game is a sort of epilogue to the story, where he has to fend off remaining egg robos left behind in the wake of Eggman's assault. And this is a cool bit of lore that shows us that Eggman does cause real lasting damage to these places even after Sonic has saved the day. Knuckles' story skips the Death Egg Zone, since Sonic already destroyed it, and instead ends with a boss fight in Sky Sanctuary. In terms of gameplay, Knuckles offers completely new routes through most of the stages. Since he's a native of Angel Island, he knows shortcuts and alternate paths through that Sonic himself wouldn't, and so his levels can sometimes be completely new experiences. For example, his path through Lava Reef is entirely different, since Sonic and Knuckles enter from different spots. A noticeable exception to this is Flying Battery, which makes sense. Knuckles wouldn't know his way around one of Eggman's battleships. This was all the result of an idea by Sonic Team newcomer Takashi Iizuka, who proposed that multiple playable characters shouldn't just be cosmetic options. They should feature their own unique movesets, with alternate routes through each level that take advantage of said movesets. This incentivizes repeat plays through the game beyond just the promise of a different ending, although you can have those too. Sonic & Knuckles as a standalone product is a slightly more enjoyable game than the vanilla Sonic 3, I think. But I don't think anybody really tends to view these games as separate products. They were conceptualized as one big game after all, and Sonic Team went out of their way to make sure we'd still be able to play them as such. And as weird and borderline deceptive as the game's lock-on technology may have been, it did give us some neat bonus features we probably wouldn't have gotten otherwise. Connecting the Sonic & Knuckles cartridge to a copy of Sonic 2 results in the ability to play through the entirety of the older game as Knuckles, essentially creating an online ROM hack in physical form. It's actually still kind of bonkers that they did this. The levels themselves are unchanged, but there are a few quirks that result. The shield power-up is a different color for Knuckles, which I'm assuming just has to do with the available color palettes for Genesis hardware. When I was collecting all the Chaos Emeralds as Knuckles, I couldn't help but notice that your ring count is now retained when starting from a checkpoint, which makes collecting all the emeralds easier, as does the fact that the special stages have had their ring requirements reduced, sometimes by as much as half. Knuckles' moveset doesn't affect level progression too much. It is cool to be able to glide and climb to bypass areas Sonic wouldn't normally be able to, but the final boss is significantly harder thanks to Knuckles' reduced jump height, so have fun with that. While Sonic Team did have plans to also work Knuckles into Sonic 1 in a similar manner, apparently his color palette had too many adverse side effects on the game's graphical assets for them to be able to iron it all out in time for the game's release. So instead, locking on to Sonic 1 provides a full version of the Sonic 3 special stages, titled Blue Sphere, which are all completely randomized by the game jumbling up different chunks, assets, and color palettes of existing levels in nearly endless combinations. Seriously, I mean endless. There are over 130 million possible level combinations, with the game looping endlessly should the player actually manage to make it to the end. Progress is recorded using passwords, and the ring counter in these stages count down instead of up like in the main game, which helps in getting perfects. And a perfect will allow you to skip ahead 10 levels, making the effort well worth it. Overall, Blue Sphere is a neat little bonus feature, but not one I've spent a whole lot of time with. I'm just not all that fond of Sonic 3's special stages to begin with. But of course, stacking Sonic & Knuckles and Sonic 3 together gets you the full, uncut game as the developers originally intended, apparently. Sonic 3 and Knuckles combines both games into a single marathon, with all three characters playable across 14 zones. So this is the only way to play as Tails in the latter half of the game or as Knuckles in the first half. And it all comes complete with Sonic 3's save feature. They even added 2 save slots, and saves even remember your lives and continues now. And would you look at that, your Sonic 3 files even carry over, which honestly should have been our first clue as kids that we had just paid twice for one full game, but what did we care? So has anything been changed across the two games? Well, some of the music sees an interesting tweak. See, Sonic & Knuckles featured new music for the title screen, invincibility, and mini-bosses, and probably due to this version of Sonic 3 being played through a copy of Sonic & Knuckles, any instance of those tracks being played will always use the Sonic & Knuckles versions. This isn't necessarily a good nor bad thing, and it's not like any of the actual stage music was changed, but for people who maybe preferred the Sonic 3 jingles, it can be a bit of a bummer, I suppose. Sonic 3 and Knuckles unfortunately does feature some minor cut content, though. I do miss the Sonic & Knuckles title screen, I always really like that one, but I understand why it would have to go. The opening cutscene for Knuckles' story is also gone now, presumably for continuity reasons, since it took place in Mushroom Hill Zone while the full game starts off at Angel Island Zone. And I don't understand why they cut the Big Arms boss for Sonic and Tails. Knuckles still fights it, but for whatever reason it's now MIA for the other two characters, and I don't understand the reason for this change. Like, I get that Launch Base isn't the end of the game anymore, so maybe it would be weird to have this big dramatic boss fight at the game's halfway point, but if that's the case, why is it still there for Knuckles? It's just odd. Maybe it was originally designed as a Knuckles-specific boss, and the reason it was in Vanilla Sonic 3 at all was to act as a makeshift finale? I don't know, your guess is as good as mine. All 3 bonus stages are now available in the full game, still dependent on your ring count as usual. All the special stages are here, albeit still split between their respective games. You'll only access the first 7 in Sonic 3, and won't get the next 7 until Sonic & Knuckles. And yes, this means there are a total of 14 emeralds now, which is one of the more significant additions to the full version of Sonic & Knuckles. Any giant ring you enter after reaching Mushroom Hill will take you to the Master Emerald Chamber in Hidden Palace, where the Chaos Emeralds you've collected will be transferred into altars and have their powers sapped. Jumping on any of the new emeralds will allow you to access the special stage to restore its power, forming it into one of the new Super Emeralds. This is a cool way to do the special stages because now you can choose to complete them in any order, which allows you to get the hard ones out of the way first or save them for last, whichever you prefer. Collecting all 7 of the Super Emeralds unlocks new transformations for all 3 characters. Hyper Sonic and Hyper Knuckles gain an immunity to drowning as well as new attacks. Hyper Sonic gains a forward air dash that also acts as a screen-wide attack, and Hyper Knuckles can trigger a similar effect whenever he glides into a wall by causing a small quake. And Tails, before now, gained nothing by collecting all the Chaos Emeralds, but the Super Emeralds finally grant him his own super form, and this may be the best one of them all. For whatever reason, Tails attracts the help of a group of superpowered flickies that automatically attack any nearby enemies. And let me tell ya, few things in life are so satisfying as to just stand there and watch a giant robot boss be pecked to death by a flock of tiny birds. Having all 3 characters playable in every stage really shows off the potential of Iizuka's original vision for Sonic 3K's stages, particularly with Knuckles. His routes through the Sonic 3 half of the game often look nothing like the other 2 characters. His Act 2 of Angel Island is 100% exclusive as he travels through subterranean tunnels that Sonic and Tails had no way to access. He has an entire new section tacked onto the end of Hydro City, at the spot where Sonic and Tails would otherwise just fall down to the boss fight. He even has an entirely new Act 2 boss for Marble Garden. And remember how I complained about Carnival Night Zone going on forever? Well, for Knuckles, that level looks like this. He even gets to skip the dumb boss. We see another reminder that his story happens after Sonic's, as the giant tower that was blown up in Launch Base Zone is still collapsed here, resulting in Knuckles taking an alternate path. Even outside of the completely new Knuckles paths, though, the Sonic 3 levels did receive some minor layout changes, presumably as the devs had more time to finalize them while they finished work on Sonic and Knuckles. This is most noticeable in Launch Base Zone, which had many of its more deviously placed enemies and hazards completely removed, and useful power-ups placed where there used to be traps. I assume this was done for the sake of difficulty balancing, since Launch Base now represents the game's halfway point rather than a final challenge. Carnival Night's stupid barrel, though? Perfectly fine to leave that in, I guess. And while you're playing around with all the alternate paths and differing movesets, you may start to notice that each character essentially acts as their own difficulty setting. Sonic is the normal mode, the one the developers expect most people to play and get used to, with the most versatile pool of abilities that are all situationally useful. Tails' flight ability is much more universally helpful, allowing the player to bypass difficult platforming segments and more easily reach the higher and faster routes through each level, effectively making him the game's easy mode. And Knuckles, with his lower jump and more mechanical exploratory abilities, acts as the game's hard mode, his paths through each level often being more claustrophobic with more enemies and hazards. This is, quite frankly, exceptional game design, offering players enough variety in playstyles without clashing with the core design of the underlying gameplay. Sonic 3 and Knuckles is a layered and multifaceted platformer that also tells a cohesive and dramatic story without bogging the game down with intrusive cutscenes or drawn-out dialogue. It set a standard any other platformer would be honored to match, and even to this day, it's still rare to see 2D platformers attempt any sort of real storytelling in quite the same way this one did. Sonic 3 and Knuckles was Sonic Team's magnum opus, and if there's one Sonic game that's going to stand the test of time as a bona fide pinnacle of the genre, it's this one. I honestly wish I could put into words how incredible of a game the full package of Sonic 3 really is. It's the fan favorite for a reason. It's so close to the hearts of so many people. I didn't have any game consoles growing up, we just had a family PC that we all shared, and so many days of my childhood were spent playing the Sonic and Knuckles collection on that computer. Best screensaver ever, by the way. It's my most replayed Sonic game, the one I've become most intimately familiar with, memorizing every nook and cranny of each level. The game hasn't aged a day. It's a timeless experience that will always be worth revisiting. Sonic 3 is an amazing game. Sonic and Knuckles is arguably an even better one. But together, they form a complete package that is, quite possibly, the greatest platformer of all time.
It starts.